Hello, you guys. Welcome back to Ask for Me in My House. I'm Elena.
And I'm Jordan.
We are going to continue on this series that we've been doing on world versus word, and we are tackling the idea of a pure, centered
upbringing for your children.
Yes. And I think when you hear that, you're like, what are you talking about? But as we unpack this, I think you will completely understand. And I would say that parents, this is probably the biggest thing that we have against us and to challenge us. And so to be proactive and to push against what the world is doing versus what God's word says for us to do, we constantly have to have these conversations. So I know we've done several episodes talking about things that are very similar, but I promise you that each one of these has a different
element to it.
Yes, a different element and a different need for, because we don't want to rush through these conversations. I think they're all really important to have and really important to dissect on each of these. And the pure centered one is definitely the biggest one that I think parents are at war with consistently. And so we want to tackle that today.
Yeah. And like Melena said, we've done several installments of this kind of what does the world say about something and what does God's word say about it. Mm-hmm. But it's just impossible to do in 1 or 2 30-minute episodes. Right. So we might kind of have some overlap across some of these elements because they're all related, mm-hmm. but we're really trying to just zero in and hone in on certain aspects. So you maybe never heard the term peer-centered before. And you're like, what does that mean? We're going to unpack that. We're going to talk a little bit about what the scripture says in regard to these things and some other alternate options that might be available to you that you're looking for, as you're looking at what's going on in the world today, what's going on in my children's life and how they're being influenced. Mm-hmm. And just with the whole goal here and the idea is to provide some practical and realistic solutions. If you're like, I don't like what the world is doing in this regard, or I don't like what the world is doing over here, so mm-hmm. I want to find an alternative and opt out of that.
Yep.
So when we kind of start this conversation, we want to ask the question to frame everything is who in our children's life have the most influence over them? And so even now you're just, if you ask yourself that question and you would probably think, well, I do, I'm the parent, right? I'm mom, I'm dad. Mm-hmm. So I have the most influence or the most say. Mm-hmm. Or could it potentially be your teachers or your children's teachers, right? If your children are in school or school age, they might have teachers that they are interacting with, or like a main homeroom teacher, or maybe they're playing sports, so their coach could be a really big influence on them, or of course their friends and their classmates or their other teammates on the sports that they play, mm-hmm. Or neighborhood kids, right? Like neighborhood families. So just depends.
Shows that they're watching.
Yeah, why don't you touch on that whole thing too, of like some of the other ways in which our kids are influenced.
Yeah, whatever they're seeing, visualizing. And this is something that I was woken up to really early on because when our oldest was young, we let her watch like Disney shows. And I feel like I've talked about this already, so I don't mean to be redundant, but I remember that there were some Disney shows that she kept watching that I started noticing her behavior was replicating that. And I remember thinking, well, this is such like a cute little innocent, like Moana, for example. Like it's cute, it's innocent.
She's singing the song. She's like standing up on the paddleboard.
Yeah, she's so cute.
She's role playing. She's pretending.
Right. But if you look at Moana's character, she's rebelling against her family. She's going against what they're saying for her to do. Like the theme.
That's the underlying, like beneath the surface.
And that pretty much happens. And that pretty much happens with a lot of movies. And so even ask yourself the question of like, okay, this character that they're watching, what is the overall theme here? What is the overall message that's being shown? Because if you dissect Moana, it's rebel against your parents, do what you want to do. And there's a whole lot of witchcraft
go discover like
in it too.
Your parents and your family, they're holding you back.
They've been keeping secrets from you. They've been hiding things from you.
And you need to go off and discover your own thing and find your own path in life. And that's really the pattern in the playbook of a lot of the world, you know, and especially here in the West where it's like, no, you need your own path of discovery. You need your own mission in life. You need like everything in your
parents
past, like
are evil. They're holding things against you. They have been indoctrinating you all these years, and you're now like, it's literally like the same thing everywhere.
Yeah, and so even just the idea of, and this is a little bit more like philosophical, if you will, but like a television, if you say that slowly, it's tell you a vision, or tell a vision, right? Mm-hmm. And so why do they tell you like to tune in to this? Yeah, there's broadcasting going on, but you're tuning into something, a channel, right? Like these words in this language is maybe a little bit more deeper than we think when you start thinking about what am I being programmed with? What am I being passively taught? Right. And that, I think the entertainment and television and movies and all that, it has such a big influence on children, because especially when you have a behemoth in the industry like Disney or any of that, where everyone else is watching it, everyone's got the merchandise, they go to the theme park, they see all the shows and then they see all the off spin of the movie into a TV show. And it's like it's all over assault of concepts and of doctrines, right? And so yes, there are agendas. Yes, there are messages that these companies are trying to get across, and you can just say, well, it's harmless, it's innocent, it's a children's thing.
This is a whole nother episode.
But yeah, we can suffice to say for now, like there's a lot going on there, and yeah, leave us some comments down below if you guys want us to unpack that a little bit more, or if what you guys are seeing in regards to entertainment and movies and TV and what the agenda looks like there. But these are just some ways that our children are influenced. And so kind of I put at the bottom of my list churches or small groups, and it's like, well, yeah, it's kind of sad that a lot of times, at least for a certain point in your life, you're less and less influenced by the church. And I think some of the points that have been made in more recent years from people who are critical of the church, and rightfully so too, not necessarily enemies of the church, but just trying to take like a critical evaluation, say, well, yeah, like lock-ins and pizza parties and throwing a pie in the youth pastor's face, like maybe that was a tactic that worked for a short while with a specific denomination or demographic. But if you're trying to teach kids the gospel, and if you're trying, like, again, I'm not trying to get into a debate over like what should and shouldn't churches do, but I think we should at least be having the conversation and asking the question of like, are these the things that are going to leave a deep, profound, lasting impact on kids when they're like struggling with friends who are 14, 15 years old, taking their lives and committing suicide, or having being all kinds of struggles and troubles and traumas that kids younger and younger these days are starting to face. And if the answer to that is in the church, like, oh, come on and like have pizza and like we'll do a movie night at the church, like, yeah, it's
then we'll watch a Disney movie.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I appreciate the invitation to attend an event, but if you're not giving kids answers, and if you're not getting to their heart and you're not taking them seriously, then I think we're doing a disservice, right?
You're just entertaining them.
Okay. 100%.
So, yeah.
So this is, again, this is the ways that our kids are influenced, right?
Yeah.
And so we just want to ask a few questions. These are questions we ask ourselves that were kind of a heart check and a sucker punch to me, but we're not asking these above you, we're asking these alongside you. And so, honey, what are the 4 questions that we came up with as far as doing kind of an evaluation on how much influence you as a mom or dad have over your kids?
The first question is, how much time are you spending with them? And we wanted to include intentional time and like on purpose. How much time are you spending with your kids on purpose? Because I think to say that you have to spend 24/7 with your kids is just ignorant. Like we said in the last one, like Jordan and I are currently not with our children. Does that mean that we are bad parents? No. Does it mean that if you're not with your kids 24/7,
speak for yourself.
you're a bad? No. So this question don't want you to focus on the time element, because I think a lot of like single moms will beat themselves up and say like, I work so many hours, like the actual amount of time that I have with my kids is so limited. And then when I get home, I have to cook, I have to clean, I have to do all the house things. So we understand that. The reason we ask this question is the on purpose part. The time that you do have with your kids, what does that time look like? Is it a time where you guys are sitting down together and just being in each other's presence? There is such beauty in being with someone just solely to be with them.
Quality time.
Yes. And without any agenda, I've noticed that my kids really enjoy nighttime with us. And it's solely because we have nothing to do at night other than go to bed. And so I find that we are able to get.
And have WWE matches in the bed.
In the bed, that as well. But there's no urgency to get somewhere. There's no rush to hurry this up. It's just a very still. Aside from when you're doing that, it's a still moment where we're all just being. So like, how much time do you spend being with your kids? Like the idea of just like being. How much do your kids see you on your phone, and what is your response during that time? I would say that phones and computers are probably the thing that parents probably struggle with the most.
Yeah, no, I do.
It's just difficult because like for us, we work on our phones. And so I think we even have to really, really, really have to be very intentional about how that looks like for us. But again, find the thing that you see distracts you the most from your kids. It doesn't necessarily have to be your phone, because for some people that's probably not an issue. Maybe it's a TV, maybe, I don't know, fill in the blank. How much do your children see you doing this other thing that is distracting? And then
if your kid comes up to you while you're on that device or occupied with that, whatever that thing is, what is your response? Is it, I'm going to look over for a second, I'm not even going to make eye contact, I'm going to respond verbally or non-verbally, but I'm still engaged in what I'm doing? Or is my response, put my phone down, put it down, put it in my pocket, put it somewhere else, and say, like, lock in eye contact with the kid. And you're like, oh, now that's communicating to them, you're more important to me than whatever this other thing is.
Yep. How many of your daily decisions are made around not only your children's needs, but their wants and their desires? And
because a lot of people would say, myself included, like, well, I spend so much time with the kids, or I spend a lot more time with them than most parents or most dads, right? But the problem is, or you say, oh, I'm thinking everything's made in every decision's made in mind with my kids in mind. Like, I have to cook for them, I have to bathe them, I have to change them, I have to, this, that, and the other. But how much of that is just their bare necessities, like to live, versus like Ari wanted to build a ukulele with me the other day. And so I was like, all right, let's go build it. Let's go get a kit and put it together.
And it was the most inconvenient time possible. I remember when I saw you guys starting to do that, I was like, there's probably like 50 other things we could all collectively be doing right now as a family.
Yeah.
And that is probably the last thing on the list. But this is actually a really beautiful representation of like serving and being with your kids, despite having so many other things going on.
Well, it's the Mary and Martha approach, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Martha, there was a lot to do and she was doing it.
Right.
But Mary was just sitting there with Jesus, and Martha was getting angry at her sister, like, why aren't you helping me? And Jesus actually praises Mary for what she's doing.
Right.
Like, no, she gets it. It's the quality time, the time on purpose, and she wanted to do that, and that was the right thing,
Yeah. And then the last question is, how many stories are you telling your children? I think the art of storytelling, whether it is a Bible story or the story of you and your spouse meeting each other, or how you got your first dog,
our kids love our wedding story.
Bringing the kids home from
we
the
don't
hospital.
Tell them the honeymoon story. We tell them the wedding story.
Like, how many stories do your kids know about you and know about your family? And this kind of ties into the other episode that we did about your mission statement and your family vision and family team. Like, your kids should just love and know so much of the origins of your family and have such interest and understanding of like who is who and where did you guys meet each other? Like, our kids ask us those types of questions all the time, even though they know the answer to them. But to them, it's just really sweet to see how things came to be. And like, I see them asking themselves, like, I wonder how I'll meet my husband, or I wonder how and like, it's just the cutest thing ever. And so how many stories are you telling your children?
And that goes all the way back again. We've harped on this, and we're going to continue to, because Deuteronomy 6 is that great passage and chapter in Scripture that talks about how Israel ought to teach their children and how they ought to pass down the commandments, the statutes, the stories of their people, of what God has done. And he's like, this is how you're to do it. Like, basically teach them and talk to them and train them all day, every day about these things. And those were all passed down verbally, right? Primarily verbally. So that looked like, as you're working and your son or your daughter is helping you work or taking care of the house, and you're saying, you know, like Milena might say, hey, darling, did I ever tell you this story? You know, and now you're able to teach and pass on, and it's not forced. It's not something that's like, all right, everyone, like, stop what you're doing and sit down so I can verbally regurgitate something to you. It's part of your daily rhythm, and it's part of your the life fabric there. And so I look at all that, I'm like, yeah, I see the value in the Scripture, of course, for saying what the Lord has done and teaching them to your children and your children's children.
And what happens to Israel every time that they don't. Like, it's just massive chaos.
Yeah, and it hurts them. But that was such an influence over not only one generation of kids, but their entire legacy of the generations throughout Scripture, right? Right. And so that brings us to this idea of, back to the original question of the peer-centered childhood, and kind of what might be some problems or some issues that we need to examine together. And so when we say peer-centered, what we're talking about here is children who grow up with people their age and are primarily influenced and dominating the influence of your children as other children around them, right? Whether that's sports, school, neighborhood friends, right? So there's such an influence over your kids, around kids their age, that we don't even realize it anymore. We just think, well, this is what's normal because everyone else is doing it in our society. So therefore, if it's normal, it must be good. But is that necessarily true? And so that's where I wanted to read again from a book that I've brought up a few times before. It's from Jeremy Pryor. It's called Father's Compass, and it talks about different insights and words of wisdom for fathers, but fathers and mothers in general. It applies, and this is some of the things that he's looking at in the world around him and how we might be able to navigate some of these things. So in chapter 4 of this book, he titles it The Predictable Trap of a Peer-Centered Childhood. I just want to take a few minutes to read what he wrote here. There are so many ways kids today are growing up in environments never before attempted, or in many cases even imagined. One of these social experiments we've been running both in the church and at school is to raise and educate kids almost entirely in same age groups. It's clear the advantages to the system for both control and for curriculum. The transition from the one-room schoolhouse to same-age classes emerged from the need to educate children at a massive industrial scale. This, in turn, has given rise to a new kind of person, the peer-centered child. We now tend to take it for granted that a child will care less about their parents' opinions of them and more about their peers. We assume, because this is so common, it's healthy socialization. But is it? After spending decades looking at the data, 2 secular Canadian doctors are now claiming this development is extremely unhealthy and even dangerous. In their groundbreaking book, Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers, they lay out this thesis. Children today look to their peers for direction, their values, identity, and codes of behavior. This peer orientation undermines family cohesion, interferes with healthy development, and fosters a hostile and sexualized youth culture. Children end up becoming overly conformist, desensitized, and alienated, and being cool matters more to them than anything else. Their prescription? increase parental influence, and reestablish proper hierarchy in the home in order to make our kids feel safe and understood and earn back their loyalty and love. I find this kind of language fascinating. One reviewer of the book on Amazon summed up the author's stories. Like countless other parents, Canadian doctors Newfield and Mate woke up one day to find that their children had become secretive and unreachable. Pining for time with friends, they recoiled or grew hostile around adults. Why? The problem lies in a long-established though questionable belief that the earliest possible mastery of the rules of social acceptance leads to success. Multiple playdates, daycare, preschool, and after-school activities groom children to transfer their attachment needs from adults to their peers. They become what the authors call peer-oriented. Again, from their book, peer-oriented children are obsessed with who likes whom, who prefers whom, who wants to be with whom. There's no room for missteps, for perceived disloyalty, disagreement, differences, or noncompliance. True individuality is crushed by the need to maintain the relationship at all costs. Yet no matter how hard the child works, when peers replace parents, the sense of insecurity can escalate until it is too much to endure. That is often when the numbness sets in, the defensive shutdown occurs, and the children no longer appear vulnerable. They become emotionally frozen by the need to defend themselves against the pain of loss, even before it actually occurs. Our failure to keep our children attached to us and the other adults responsible for them has not only taken away their shields, but put a sword in the hands of their peers. When peers replace parents, children lose their vital protection against the thoughtlessness of others. The vulnerability of a child in such circumstances can easily be overwhelming. The resulting pain is more than many children can bear. Studies have been unequivocal in their findings that the best protection for a child, even through adolescence, is a strong attachment with an adult. The Bible illustrates the danger of this orientation through a story that occurred more than 3,000 years ago. One of the greatest tragedies, the division of Israel into the southern and northern kingdoms, was the result of a young, pure-oriented king. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, was given sage advice from his father's counselors, but instead turned to the buddies he grew up with to set a policy that would determine the fate of the kingdom. After the people implored the new king for mercy, we read in 1 Kings 12:13 and 14, "And the king answered to the people harshly, and forsaking the counsel that the old men had given him, he spoke to them according to the counsel of the young men, saying, 'My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions.'" When we seek to build multi-generational families, our children must have both the skill to interact intergenerationally and the experience of deep and enduring attachment to their parents throughout their childhood. Forcing our kids to spend a huge percentage of their childhood in same age groups without the engagement or protection of their parents or family will predictably give rise to this intractable peer orientation. And Jeremy sums up the chapter with this. Our entire society is designed around breaking up the children of the family into these same age groups, from sports to schools and even to church programs. Creating alternatives to counter this pattern is challenging and costly to the family, but perhaps not as challenging or costly in the long term as losing the hearts of our kids.
Wow.
And so that's really what's been stirring in Milena and me as we seek to think about the influence we have over our children. And not that it's bad that they have friends and that they're with others their age, but when that becomes such the norm that it's wrong to do anything other than that, that's where we need to say, whoa, hold on, time out, pump the brakes. Is what you're saying by me proposing an alternative option to what is status quo, if that's bad or wrong or even evil, then and here's the data that's supporting this, and here's what's happening in our world today as a result of this, and we're trying to simply pinpoint that, then what is the response going to be, on a large scale? It's no wonder if that's a response we see, it's no wonder that people, like when you bring up a question of a one one classroom schoolhouse or
Right.
even homeschooling or homeschool community.
Mm-hmm.
It's no wonder that people are so hostile and against that, because it completely flies in the face of everything that they've been taught or that they thought that they've known their whole life.
Yeah. And I've read that so many times. You've read that to me so many times. But one thing that really I feel like I just was trying to understand or just really clicked in my mind was the idea of like other kids raising kids. And who's to say what this child probably has not been raised. That's the other thing. No one's raising their kids nowadays. The TV is, and the babysitters are. So it's like, how can you control or know? And so many kids have devices nowadays.
Or the streets, like they don't have parents, they don't have a mom and a dad,
Right.
and like people say literally, I was raised on the streets, or I got taken in by a gang, or I got taken in by so and so who was showing me how to work the street.
We just have to be so diligent. There was one time we went to a play place with the kids that's out of church. So it's like an open facility. And I went there with the kids, and there were two other little girls there who were probably 7 or 8. They both had iPhones. And I remember our kids were playing, and I'm always obviously watching all of them. But I remember one of my kids went over there, and the girls were on Snapchat, and they were doing inappropriate things on their phones. And I'm like, I'm literally at a church. I'm right here watching my kids, and this is still happening before our eyes. And it's like, parents, I just want you to just use discernment and never have your guard down, no matter where you are, no matter what you are doing. Like the enemy pries and crawls around like a lion, and he is just ready to devour at any single moment. So like, even if you are in a church facility and it's like a literal play place for young kids, there's gonna be 8-year-olds with iPads or phones on Snapchat doing the most inappropriate, heinous things that you would not think that they would be. Like, it's absurd. So I don't think we're reaching here when we talk about these things. I think the world that we live in is just very drastically different than it was when we were being raised. It's drastically changing day by day, and it's the enemies. It really is. And we have to wake up. We do not fight against flesh and blood. And so parents need to parent, or mother, father.
Yeah, I mean, that's all. Yeah, it's sad when that becomes so commonplace and so normal that anything, oh, what do you mean you don't give your 7 or 8-year-old an iPad or an iPhone? Like, of course, that's just what they do. That's the course of life. That's just that's reality as it is. And anything against that completely, like, challenge. Anytime someone's paradigm is challenged, they have one of two responses. Either it's, wow, that's really insightful, and you're right, and I'm interested to hear more about this, and I see what you mean, and I want to start looking at that more intently. Or it's, oh, you're weird, you're completely, off your rocker, you're
reaching,
you're just like your kids, and then everything always gets turned around to what they assume. And I think it's actually a defense mechanism of projection when they say things like, well, you want your kids to be social, or you don't. Like, we talked about this in a previous episode about the whole idea of, like, well, how do you socialize your homeschool kids? Oh, I lock them up for 8 hours a day and give them iPads so they don't have to look anyone in the eye, and push them in the hallway. Like, just things like that. It's when someone's paradigm is challenged in that way, they could have a projection of, like, they're saying everything that they know to be true themselves, because they can't accept a reality different than what they are in or what they had experienced. But there's really no room to improve when you're completely shut off from, like, any and all alternatives to something, especially when we know the system that we're in, the world system that we're in, is by and large broken and under the dominion of sin, right? And so, under the curse of sin. And so, all that to say, like, when you say, like, well, what's the path forward? What's the response to this? What do we do now in light of all of this? In closing, I'll just say, ask those 4 questions again of yourself, because Malena and I truly believe that we as mom and dad need to be the most influential over our children. And that's not going to be something that you force. It's going to be something that you earn. Just as what Jeremy said in that book is that the responses, or the the solution is to earn your child's trust back.
Yeah.
And that's going to be spending time with them on purpose. That's going to look like putting your phone down when your child comes and runs up to you. That's going to look like making decisions around what your kids want. And I'm not saying spoil your kids or give into their, like, no, like sometimes you gotta be like, nope, sorry, not doing that. Like, nope, you could put on your birthday list, oh, it's too expensive to just buy on a random day. We'll save it, But thinking of like, what do they want to do? And it's not always like a physical thing. Sometimes they just want to do something with you, a fun thing, right? Like, Dad, will you help me put together my ukulele, right? Like that's something he wants to do. That's beyond just his needs, right? Or telling your kids stories, like being the chief entertainer in your family, right? Like that should be something that you enjoy and that you seek to improve on. Like, I'm not the best in that. Melena's a lot better at like the storytelling and all that, but I love something I'll do is, and Melena and I were talking about this before we recorded, but I love just sitting and being with my kids, not necessarily doing something super hands-on, but just to be sitting there. It could be watching a movie, it can be listening to something, but just being there in their presence, in their midst. Right. That for me is special. And
during the mundane too, like I enjoy going into the kids' rooms so they get themselves dressed in the mornings and do their beds and do their chores. And although I could be utilizing my time and do my own chores or own things that I have to do, I enjoy just sitting in there and literally just watching them, or just like sitting there and like hearing the conversations they have with each other, or just like, I don't know.
Or even going and running errands. Like my kids will want to come with me. Oh, can I come in the car? Now, a lot of times they think they're going to get candy at the checkout counter. Like if we go to the grocery, like they assume anytime I'm going somewhere, it's to go to the grocery store so that they can get candy at the checkout counter. And I'm like, well, kids, you're more than welcome to come with me. I would love for you to come with me, but I'm going to the hardware store. I'm going to,
the hardware store post office has some candy.
That's true, but they don't know that yet. Or like I'm going to the post office or whatever, whatever that looks like. I'm picking up dry cleaning.
That's just the presence of being.
Yes, and they don't understand. Like, and when I tell them we're not getting candy, like they might go, "Aw," but then they're like, they accept it, and then they just want to be with me, and I want to be with them. And something very simple, just to like thinking like very pithy, very practical, taking your kids out to run errands or to do things. Yes, it might take a little bit longer than if you're by yourself, but I'm learning to like relish in those moments because it's fleeting. It's not here forever. There's going to come a time where hopefully they're not too peer influenced that they're not going to want to spend time with us when they're older. And that's something too, as you start thinking of these things like, well, they're not going to always want to be around you.
I rebuke that.
And I'm like, well, maybe that's because that's a lot of people saying that have been raised peer-centered or their kids have been raised peer-centered, right? And so what if we kick against that and say, actually, I'm going to do everything that I can in my power and trust the Lord in prayer to create such an upbringing and such an environment for my kids that, yeah, they will actually want to be 15, 16 years old and be around us and be in our presence and want to spend time on purpose with us, right? Amen. Like that's our prayer. So we'll keep you posted on it.
Well, I have 3 things that I think is also helpful, and I promise these will be the last 3 things. I know we keep asking you guys questions, but I think you need to ask questions in order to find where the pain points are in your family. So ask your children, what do you enjoy that we do together? What's your favorite memory that we have together? And what's something that you wish I did less of? And I think them answering those questions will give you really, really good ideas as to how your child enjoys love, because each of our children and each of your children have very different love languages. And so when they answer those questions, it might be a good indication as to what their love language is. Even if you think you might know it, I think their answer might shock you. I ask my kids this at least once a month, and it changes frequently. So ask them that question of like, what's something that you enjoy? What's your favorite memory? The favorite memory that one of my kids told me, I was like, what in the world? That was literally the most random Tuesday afternoon. And that was something that like they talked about for months. And then what do you wish I did less of really will help indicate what they see is distracting you or what is taking time away. And now obviously, like if they say work, you might want to change, like find a different way to ask
Pick
them
a different answer.
Yeah, or like
some things you can't necessarily have control over.
Yeah, or like what's something that I yeah, I think you can figure out a different one for that if that ends up being the answer. But I think that would really help gauge moving forward what to do as well.
That'll preach.
All right, y'all.
Got nothing else.
Love you. See you next time. Bye.